Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be discussing the case of a mother and daughter who, while still reeling from the loss of a loved one and preparing for their funeral the next day, were brutally murdered in the family home. After decades without answers and little to no physical evidence to work with, authorities and the remaining family members need the public's help for answers. Today's case is about the murders of Anne Furst and Helen Larkin. Anne and Rudolph Furst had been together for decades and lived in their modest ranch home located at 818 Maxa Road in Aberdeen, Maryland since 1969 when the property was built. They'd moved there after they'd retired and left New York City where they had both previously worked. Rudolph retired from being a superintendent at the Rockefeller Center where Anne had also been employed at one point, but she retired in '69 from an office job at Exxon. The two spent a lot of time with each other and did practically everything together and were described as a very active older couple. The two loved traveling, they would spend winters down in Florida together, they played cards often, and were members of their local place of worship, St. Joan of Arc Church. They were also members of something called the Golden Age Club in Aberdeen, which was described as a social organization for elderly residents in the area.
How old are we talking?
Both Anne and Rudolph were in their 80s.
Okay.
Anne specifically was 83.
Okay. Whenever I hear golden years or anything like that, I think of Golden Girls.
Okay, yeah, that's a good reference.
But you know what's weird?
What?
I'm pretty sure some of the Golden Girls were like 50.
Yeah, they weren't that old. We talk about this all the time with the hairstyles, how they
Yes.
make you look older than you really are.
Yep.
But all right, so Anne also had some hobbies of her own, and she specifically adored gardening. It was truly one of her all-time favorite things to do. Neighbors, friends, and family said that her garden was an absolute spectacle, and everyone who lived in the neighborhood of Adams Heights ogled over the beauty of her garden, and they said that they saw her out there constantly tending to it. The Fursts were also incredibly friendly people and got along with everyone very easily. But unfortunately, at some point, and I can't quite pinpoint exactly when, but prior to 1989, Rudolph Furst was diagnosed with cancer. The neighborhood Anne and Rudolph resided in, Adams Heights, really rallied around the couple and did all they could to help while the Fursts worked through this new life now that Rudolph had become ill. Reverend John Snyder of the St. Joan of Arc Church even came to the Fursts' home on several occasions to offer communion to Rudolph due to the fact that he couldn't always attend church while he was sick. And Anne and Rudolph were a very religious couple, and they attended services often, so this was a nice gesture to have their reverend come see him. But sadly, after a courageous battle, Rudolph did succumb to his illness and passed away on Monday, October 16th, 1989. Of course, the family was distraught, and neighbors of the Fursts had made comments about how they just weren't sure how 83-year-old Anne was going to hold up without Rudolph, as the two had been practically inseparable. One neighbor told the Baltimore Sun, quote, "They were the nicest people you can imagine. They were always together. Everybody kept asking me, what is Anne going to do? Because they did everything together. They were so well liked," end quote.
I think that's a common thing that you hear about, especially with elderly people when one of them dies. It's usually like not long after that one may die from like a broken heart almost.
Yeah.
Because you've been with somebody for so long and it's just like you almost lose your will to live, I guess, or you lose your purpose in life, I guess, is more like it.
It's very true.
But just listening about their life and how they were religious and went to church all the time and their age and the time period and stuff, I always talk back about how it like reminds me of my family on my dad's side.
That's exactly the vibe I was getting here. I'm like, this totally seems like your family.
Right.
And just how they were. So on Tuesday, October 17th, 1989, the day after Rudolph's passing, loved ones attended his wake, and then I believe they got together after the wake at one of Anne and Rudolph's daughters' homes in Churchville, Maryland, which was roughly a 15 to 20-minute drive from Aberdeen, where the Fursts had lived. The services were in the evening, and Anne and her family, and more specifically, her 56-year-old daughter Helen Larkin, had spent a few hours that night together. Helen had come down earlier that day from Greenwich, Connecticut, where she lived with her family, to attend these services for her father, But from what I can tell, Helen's family, meaning her husband and kids, weren't coming down to Maryland until the following day to attend the funeral. But around 10 p.m. that night, Anne and Helen left the get-together to head back home to Aberdeen. It appears as though Helen was going to be spending the night at Anne's Maxa Road home, and then the next morning they would head over to the funeral with the rest of their family and friends. The funeral was to be held at 11 a.m. the morning of Wednesday, October 18th, 1989, at St. Joan of Arc Church in Aberdeen, the same church that Anne and Rudolph were members of. Around 10:30 that morning, Helen's husband Richard and their 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, arrived to Anne's home to meet up with the 2 ladies and then make the drive over to the church. When they arrived, they were unable to get into the house and were knocking and calling out for the 2, but were having no luck getting into the residence, and no one was answering them either, which they found to be incredibly odd. Richard and the kids decided to go around to the back of the house to see if they could get in from the sliding glass door there, and that's when they found that it had been smashed in with a brick. As they walked through the house to try and locate Anne and Helen, they made the gruesome discovery that both women had been brutally murdered. The children went running and screaming out of the house with Richard, and authorities were called to the scene immediately. The Aberdeen Police Department was the responding agency, but due to the fact that it was a small department, they just weren't equipped to handle a double murder, so the case was handed over to the Harford County Sheriff's Department, and they began their investigation into the murders. There were several detectives that worked the case throughout the early days, but by about 2 months in, there were 2 dedicated detectives assigned to work the case full-time. Now, before we dive into the details of the investigation, I do just want to take a bit of time to talk about the effect this crime had on the area and a few other things that were going on locally as well.
And I mean, just to butt in before you dive into that.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about this, it was said to be a small community and everybody knew the Fursts and how, you know, when Rudolph died, everybody was worried about Anne and her garden was a spectacle. So these are like people that everybody in the area knows.
Yep.
And you just have the tragedy of the husband dying.
Yep.
And then, like, talk about a whirlwind of, like, a shitstorm.
Yes.
Now, mother and daughter just go home after a wake, ready to go to the funeral the next day. And what are the odds that somebody broke in through their back door and murdered both of them?
It's horrific. Like, I can't even...
Obviously, the toll on the family is unmeasurable.
Of course.
But also the neighborhood and the community.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I mean, you have to be reeling at that point. Like, thinking... Were these people targeted? What happened here? Why is this happening? This doesn't make sense. What's with the timing? The timing is so bizarre.
Right. People are already sad.
Yeah.
Now they're sad and worried and scared and...
It's like every emotion you can imagine.
Right.
Yeah. So we had talked a little bit before about the community that the Fursts had lived in, but like John just mentioned, you know, it's a very tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and there were a lot of elderly folks that were living there. This wasn't just... made up of, you know, younger families or anything like that. I would say probably 90% of the residents there were older people.
It's like a village back in the day.
Yeah.
Where it seems like most of the people that were there probably lived there for most of their lives, never sold their house. So as they're all aging up, they're all getting older and older, and they all stayed there.
Exactly. I mean, even with the Fursts, the house had been built in 69. This is now 89.
Right.
They literally had been there the entire time that the house was there.
Right.
And it's 20 years. It doesn't look like they had any plans to leave. So it's just one of those things. But once the residents of Adams Heights were made aware of what had happened, there really was so much fear and confusion. There were several people interviewed for local news stations, and one woman in particular who had just found out about the fact that Anne and Helen had been killed was spoken to, and she said that she was scared because she was living in her home alone. And that was something that was also very common with locals in this area. Again, going back to it being an older community, there were many people whose spouses had passed away and they were left living by themselves. And people were thinking, like, is this why this happened to Anne? Could I now be a target because I'm an elderly woman living by myself? Or an elderly man living by myself? It could be either way.
Right, and I totally understand their feelings on that. And then maybe they weren't, you know, as privy to the information as we are now about how their local police agency wasn't capable of working this double murder by themselves.
Yeah.
So resources are probably already thin to begin with. So you're like, okay, who's really going to be here to protect me?
Yep, exactly. I totally get it. So back to the whole targeting thing, that was something that people wondered about a lot when it came to Anne and Helen's murders, were they specifically targeted? And several people have brought up the idea that if Rudolph's service information was listed in the local paper, that people who had nefarious intentions and maybe wanted to rob someone would see that as an easy target because they would know when the family wouldn't be home.
Right. They'd probably be away at the wake. They'd be having a gathering after the fact. And then maybe late night they would come back. Or if the services were being held away from the house, maybe they had been staying elsewhere.
Yeah.
So there could have been an intruder either in the house or came into the house thinking that it was going to be unoccupied at the time. And it turns out that they were both there.
That's very possible, yeah. And another common question people had, again, surrounding that same idea, has to do with just if Anne herself was the specific target, just because, like we just mentioned, she was a vulnerable older woman now living by herself because Rudolph had just died. And again, these people would know this because of the service information being listed in the paper, an obituary, anything like that.
Yep.
Something I did want to bring up about that, though, has to do with, let's pretend nothing in the paper has any relevance. Even though there were so many older people living in this area, you can't forget that they all have family. And they could have a child, a grandchild, who could be frequenting the area, and maybe they had nefarious intentions and say they spend time with their grandparent or their parent often.
Yep. Or
and then they know what happened, with Rudolph dying.
Yeah, I mean, they could even have an adult child that lives with them.
Yes, exactly. That's very possible. Yep. So I think, honestly, at the end of the day, the big questions here kind of boil down to, was Anne or her home specifically a target? If so, why? And was Helen also a target, or was this a situation where she was just unfortunately in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Well, I think that it's fair to believe that Anne's house was a target.
I agree.
I don't know about Helen because there's no confirmation that would have been made by anybody. I don't know if maybe Anne told somebody, oh, Helen's going to come back to my house later, or if it was just like a spur of the moment thing while they're out. It's like, oh, I'm going to go back with mom. I'm going to stay at the house, whatever.
Exactly.
Like,
and it's not like she lived in this area.
Right. You would have had to think like, okay, Anne and Helen had come back to the house. Somebody from the gathering must have gained the information that Helen was going to be there and then went after the fact to attack her. I mean, I think that's much more of a stretch than saying, oh, I know that this lady Anne, her husband just died. She left. This looks like a prime opportunity for me to break in and try and steal something from the house because she's probably not going to be there.
Yep.
But as of now, I think that at least the house was probably a target. I would just want to know more about crime in the area. Like, does this never happen and it just randomly happened? Because then that would solidify the idea that somebody was like, okay, this lady's not going to be there, or this lady's vulnerable and I could probably rob her. Or if it's something where, crime was spilling over to the area during that time, maybe this just happened to be a coincidence. Yeah,
so we're going to touch on that in just a minute, but something that I did want to bring up, people, on online forums and things like that had been asking specifically like what this area itself was like, people who lived at least in this neighborhood or surrounding neighborhoods. And I guess it was somewhat close to the highway, 95, and it was also close to a more city-like area, but people said that this little spot just felt like it was so far removed from that. Of course, there's always the possibility that crime could spill over, but something of this nature.
But why is it that house, that night, after what just happened? There are too many things that would have to be a coincidence.
Agreed.
For it not to be like, okay, at least her house was targeted, hoping that she wasn't going to be there and she was going to get robbed.
Yes, agreed. All right, so moving along, as we were just talking about, the community was reeling. And I have to say, when I was researching this case, I was definitely getting vibes of Mary Thomas and David Johnson's case.
Yep.
Especially considering the fact that this had such an effect on the locals. This wasn't the type of thing to happen in this area. What are they going to do now? So, things like that.
I definitely get vibes of it because you have an older couple. They have, their son living with them. But there was no reason why they wouldn't be home. There's no tragedy that just occurred that would have them traveling elsewhere. It's just what happened to Rudolph, where Anne was going. That, I don't know. That just makes me feel like this was somebody targeting the place, maybe not the person, and whatever ended up happening was because their plan didn't go accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, I think based off what we know so far, that seems pretty accurate.
But I will say, once we find more information about the scene and the murder and the cause of death and everything, my opinion may totally change on that, and it may be a targeted murder because you have two older women. You have an 83-year-old lady and what, a 50-something-year-old lady?
Yep.
If you're an intruder and they're home, or they come home during the commission of the crime, you telling me you can't just run away?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Why do
why
you
are
have
you
to, like,
going
brutally
after these
murder
elderly
people?
women? Yeah.
Right. So, interested to hear more.
Yes. All right. So, one neighbor of the Fursts had told the Baltimore Sun, quote, "They were wonderful people. I don't think they had an enemy in the community. It's really frightening. It's such a quiet community. You see this sort of thing happening in Baltimore, but you never think of it happening here," end quote.
How far away is this from Baltimore?
It's about 36 miles or a 45-minute drive, but you also have to consider traffic, so could be longer.
Okay. So, not on the outskirts of the city.
Definitely not, no.
I mean, if you search from Baltimore to this place, it's probably from the center of Baltimore to this place. So, let's say 20, 25 miles.
Yeah,
Who knows?
that
Something
seems
like
more
that.
accurate. Yep.
Seems like a bit of a stretch for an inner city criminal to be traveling out to this, out of the way location just to commit a crime with no further motive.
I totally agree. Now, there was also a meeting that was held with law enforcement within, I would say, roughly the first 2 weeks after the women were killed, which was sponsored by the County Office on Aging, which I didn't even know was a thing. But 2 local police officers were there to answer questions from frightened residents. One of the most common questions people wanted answers to was how they could go about protecting their homes so someone did not break in like it was believed had happened at the first home with the brick and the sliding glass door. That appeared to be one of the biggest fears, just worrying about someone trying to get into their house to break in and do whatever, and then them being attacked as well. If they could take that first step to prevent a break-in, could they prevent anything else bad happening to them? So overall, there were many additional locks being put on doors, deadbolts, those kinds of things, and security systems being installed to just create a better sense of security for locals.
Right, but you do have the downside that if you have a sliding glass door, a lock is not going to do anything because Ann's was broken with a brick.
Yes.
So I think back to, like, my grandparents, they had a sliding glass door in the back of their house, and they used to put that, like, wooden stick in the track of the door.
Yeah.
So even if you busted the lock or whatever, you couldn't slide the door open. But if you're obliterating the door, that doesn't really matter.
Yes, very true. And I think maybe that's where a security system would come in
to
like
help.
A
glass break or something.
Exactly. Or maybe get a dog or, things like that.
Or a gun.
Or a gun. Those kinds of things will deter criminals from trying to get in.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, so this kind of goes back to the crime question that John just had a few minutes ago. There had actually also been another double murder of 2 women just 2 months prior to when Ann and Helen were killed. Those 2 women's bodies were found in a trash bin behind a grocery store in another town in Maryland called Joppatown, if I'm saying that correctly. And it's only about 12 miles or a 20-minute drive from Ann's home in Aberdeen.
You said they were found in a dumpster?
Essentially, yes.
So in a public area, though?
Correct.
It's not like it was a home invasion?
No. And at the time of the initial reporting on Ann and Helen's case, the 2 women that were found behind this grocery store were still unidentified. But authorities did feel as though it was possible they were mother and daughter, which is kind of an odd coincidence considering Ann and Helen had the same relationship.
What about age?
Younger, I believe, definitely. Now, based on reporting and additional details of that case, like the fact that the 2 women found in the trash bin were strangled, it appeared as though outside of the fact that they were mother and daughter, there really were no other similarities. So that's kind of a spoiler for you already, just to know that Ann and Helen were not strangled to death.
Mm-hmm.
But again, having another brutal murder like this take place within like a, 12-mile radius in such a close span of time, of course, that's going to freak out the locals even more.
Right, especially now because you have a pattern. If people tune into the 5 o'clock news at this point, it's like, the news is making the connection. Second double murder in such and such radius. Now knowing this, the concern that we thought the community had is probably much higher because they're seeing the news. They're seeing that this may become a pattern. And now it's like, okay, this isn't a one-off. Is this something that's going to happen again?
Yeah, exactly. And I can see why people were fearful and why they put together like that meeting for people to come and ask questions and see what they could do to protect themselves or their properties and things like that. I mean, you would probably want to be doing anything you could at that time.
Right.
So about a month into the investigation into Ann and Helen's murders, a community group put together a fundraiser with a goal of $5,000 to use as a reward for information leading to the arrest of the individual or individuals responsible for their murders. This group that was working on the fundraising effort was called, and forgive me here, I do not know how this is pronounced, so it's either Gilead, or you pronounce it by spelling it Gilead.
I would say Gilead.
Yeah, so AKA the Gilbert Road and Adams Heights Community Association.
Interesting.
but I don't really understand what the D is for there. Like, it didn't really make sense to me how this all worked out.
It's like a combination of the two places?
I guess.
It's two places, right?
Yeah, Gilbert Road and then Adams Heights.
Yeah. Gilbert.
So you have the G.
I-L.
For Gilbert. Yeah, I don't know what the E is for. Then Adams, A-D, Adams Heights. Yeah. I don't know. It was like the weirdest. What do you call that?
Acronym?
Acronym. Yeah, it was just so bizarre. I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is, so I'm just going to say
I would say Gilead.
Yeah, okay, that sounds more accurate. But
it's probably wrong.
It's possible, yeah.
Gilead.
Right? I'm curious what, we're going back a lot of years now, but I wonder if anybody knows. But this group had actually been inactive for the prior 3 years before Anne and Helen were murdered, but they told the press that they had come back together for this fundraising effort to help after they were made aware of the murders. And the group's spokesman, a man named Harold, told the Baltimore Sun, quote, "It was the shock associated with the murders that led to the group's reforming. There is still a tenseness. The whole neighborhood is lit up like a Christmas tree. People are leaving their lights on. They're very cautious," end quote.
So is this like a neighborhood watch almost?
It might be. I'm not 100% sure what they were prior to this, fundraising effort that they put together.
Okay. And both of those streets or whatever are nearby? It's like a neighborhood?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So the group did actually end up raising $8,600 as a reward, which would equal nearly $21,000 today.
Wow.
And that reward was to be available for 1 year. And then if the money was not used and there wasn't an arrest made or anything like that, the funds would be returned to the donors. And unfortunately, we wouldn't be here talking about this case today if that reward had been provided to someone. Now, also, as you know, the funeral for Rudolph was supposed to be held the morning that Anne and Helen were found murdered. So that had to be postponed, and it was later reported that the funerals for all three, so Rudolph, Anne, and Helen, would be held with all three together. And that took place several weeks later, and those services were going to be private. The family was struggling immensely, and due to this, they decided to keep these services private and only allow family to attend, and they were also not speaking to the press in any capacity. The funeral director, though, a man named Robert Carver, did tell the Baltimore Sun of the family's feelings at the time, and he stated, quote, "They just cannot deal with it. They're in seclusion. They don't know what happened. They're frightened. They're horrified. It's just a horrible thing for them to deal with, and the only way they can handle it is to be by themselves," end quote. Which I think is completely understandable. Not only were they dealing with the loss of Rudolph from cancer, but then within a matter of days, 2 other loved ones are brutally and violently murdered. I mean, anyone would be horrified, heartbroken. I mean, we talked about it before, all the emotions. And it's hard enough to grieve the loss of one person, never mind 3, but also have that question in your head of like, how on earth and why on earth did this happen?
Right.
It's horrible. But okay, so now we're going to move on to the investigation and everything that was uncovered, at least that we know of that was released publicly. And we haven't really covered a case as we usually do in several weeks by, going through the different categories of an investigation, but we're going to kind of get back to that with today's case. So we'll be discussing the following categories for this episode. We'll start with the scene, and we'll kind of couple that with any physical evidence that may or may not have been found, as well as any information that I was able to glean on the causes of death for the 2 women, as there really weren't any sort of formal autopsy results released for this case. And then we'll move on to discuss a profile that was put together by authorities regarding characteristics of the person they believed killed Anne Furst and Helen Larkin. But I do want to preface this part of our discussion by saying that there is a fair chunk of information that came from Helen's daughter, Maribeth, but not directly from her necessarily in, say, an interview with like a news station. Some information does come from that, yes, because she did actually do an interview with WMAR2 News more recently, but she had been relatively active back in 2011 on forums and threads regarding her mom and grandmother's case, specifically web sleuths and something called Find a Death Forum, which I had never heard of before. I thought that was an odd name, but...
when you said Find a Death, I was like, why have I heard that before? But I'm thinking about Find a Grave.
Yeah, yep, similar. Maybe that's how they came up with that name or something.
Maybe.
But, of course, you have to kind of vet these things to determine whether or not it's actually the person commenting. Mm-hmm. People do wild stuff on the internet, but it does appear as though Web Sleuths has this system, if you will. I guess it's kind of like a system for vetting people and confirming that they are who they say they are, confirming that they're family or someone close to the victims. Mm-hmm. And based on comments and information relating to Maribeth's username on Web Sleuths, it looks like she did go through that quote-unquote verification process and is labeled as a verified insider. So I feel relatively confident that this information did come directly from her. But she did have a fair amount of information regarding details that I hadn't been able to find anywhere else in reporting on this case. So as we continue on, I will specify which things came from her forum posts as we discuss them throughout the next portion of this episode. So as per usual, let's begin with the scene itself. First and foremost, we know that the back sliding glass door to the home was smashed in with a brick. And come to find out later, that brick supposedly came from the Furst's yard, but it was also mentioned a time or two that it could have come from a neighbor's house as well, and that was something that Maribeth had also mentioned on Web Sleuths. Either way, the tool used to more than likely break into the house was something that this person grabbed when they arrived to the property or to the area, and was not something that they brought with them. Now, when walking into the house from the back sliding glass door, there was glass all over the inside of the house on the floor. And John, I have a picture of what that looked like that I'm going to send to you in just a second. And as always, for everyone listening, you can find that image on our website and our socials.
As you send me that picture, it makes sense that the glass was inside. If they're saying that the brick was thrown through it, if you're breaking a window from the inside, the glass would be outside. But in this case, an intruder was coming in from the outside. Glass would be inside the home.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, it looks fairly apparent that somebody broke the window from the outside.
Yes, exactly. So police originally said that they were unsure when the actual break-in took place, whether it was after Anne and Helen had already gotten home and were settling in for the night, or if it happened prior to them arriving home and the killer was lying in wait for them. If the latter was the case, though, then Anne and Helen would have gone about their night getting ready for bed and would have just not noticed glass all over the floor. Mm-hmm. I mean, I personally don't think you could easily miss something like that. And also, based on the layout of this house, at least that I've been able to find based on property records and a Zillow listing, it appears to me that the dining room was pretty much right in the middle of the house, and there would be no missing this whole broken sliding glass door situation. Mm-hmm. But, John, I do also want you to take a peek at the Zillow listing as well, so you can see what the inside and outside of this property looked like, and it does pretty much look exactly the same as it did back in '89, at least based on these photos that I can see on the Zillow listing.
So when I'm looking at this picture, before you even send me the Zillow listing,
yeah,
this looks like my grandparents from my dad's side dining room,
okay.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So dining room goes to the sliding glass door.
Yep.
To the side of the dining room was the kitchen.
Exactly.
The other side of the dining room was the living room.
Yeah, so this house is a little bit different than that. I think the living room was more in the front. So, like, you had the living room.
That's what it would be.
Okay, all right.
So it was like a raised ranch.
Yep.
So you'd walk up that first set of stairs.
Yep.
Right to your right-hand side would be the living room. Straight ahead of
And
you
then
would be
back.
the kitchen.
Yeah.
To the right corner
Yep.
would be the dining room.
Yep, so similar in this case, just a regular ranch, not a raised ranch.
Okay.
So this is good to see as well because you can see the backyard. You can see how wide open it was. There were no fences. Really nowhere for anyone to hide. You can see where the sliding glass door was, how this person gained entry to the home, all of those things. But you can see, like with the kitchen there, you see the dining room table, or you see the dining room and you see the kitchen right next to it.
Yeah, I mean, if it was dark and there were no lights on, I mean, they did leave at 10 o'clock to go home.
Yes, but that's something we're going to touch on in a few minutes too. Lights were on. The television was on in the living room because Helen was spending time in there.
Okay, so we're talking that they were home at the time.
That's what I believe, yeah.
Because I doubt that she would have left the TV on unless they had an animal in the house and they were leaving the TV on for the dog or something.
Yeah.
You know, I doubt that she would have left that on while going away for hours.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so either. Like, they left this get-together around 10.
Mm-hmm.
They probably would have gotten home around 10:30 because it took only about 20 minutes to drive there.
Sure.
Getting ready for bed, all of those things.
Maybe they were sitting in the living room having a snack before bed or something, talking with the TV on, and then all of a sudden this brick flies through the freaking door.
Yeah, so I don't think this is something where they got home and they're spending their time getting in their pajamas and making a drink or having a snack or doing whatever, that they're just going to not notice that there's a gaping hole in the sliding glass door.
Okay, and especially with the TV on, I know I harped on that a second ago, but it seems like if the TV was on, they were probably there watching it.
Exactly, yes. Now, I do also want to bring up the fact that it has been theorized that there's the possibility that Anne and maybe even Helen knew the killer or killers and that they were let inside the home by one of the two women. But I just think that this would be weird that someone would be coming over around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night after they'd gotten back from the wake, If they knew this person, they would have known that they're getting ready for a very hard day the next day, going to the funeral for Rudolph. So, I mean, I personally don't think this seems very probable, but who knows? And I will say there is going to be some more information that we'll discuss as we keep going that might make you change your mind a little bit, but we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get there.
Well, to play devil's advocate and not to say that this is definitely what happened.
Yeah.
But if somebody that they knew came to the door after seeing that they came home and they were like, oh, I'm so sorry about what happened to Rudolph, blah, blah, blah. And then they force their way in and then they end up murdering these two people.
Yep.
A great way to try and cover your tracks would be to make it look like there was an intruder. And it was some random person that busted through the back door, not, hey, I know you, open the door and say hi to me, and then I barge my way in and commit 2 murders.
Yeah, so you're kind of along the same lines of like where this story is going.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to bring up the other theory, essentially, like you said, the devil's advocate to that. And that's that some people have brought up the idea that maybe throwing the brick through the door was an afterthought, and that they did this before leaving the house to, I guess you'd say, throw things off and make it seem like a break-in when in reality it was someone they knew that they let inside the house. But I just feel like I have a hard time with this one. And I guess one reason being because the glass was on the inside of the house. So this person would have had to open up the door, go outside, find a brick, throw it through the door, make it look like they went in. And I'm not saying that they couldn't have done that. Of course, that's perfectly possible. But I feel like if there's all this adrenaline going in the moment and you just did this awful thing, are you actually going to cognitively be thinking about taking all these steps to make it look this way?
I think they certainly could be, because if they went there with the intention of killing these 2 women, there is premeditation there. And they're like, okay, how am I going to get away with this?
True.
They're like, okay, I'm going to go there. They're going to let me in. I'm going to kill them. Then I'm going to make it look like a break-in.
I see what you're saying. I do. So that makes me want to then pivot to the next topic, still in the same vein with the brick.
Just before we move on to the next topic,
Okay.
with the brick and everything, to lend more credence to the idea that it was somebody that they knew.
Yep.
If it was someone that attended the wake or knew that they were leaving the wake after the fact or knew that they were staying with somebody and then heading home around 10 o'clock, then if you're thinking that, was Helen a target and Anne was kind of collateral damage there, they knew that Helen was leaving that time to go to her mother's. The only person that would have known that they were both going back there would be somebody that they knew, somebody they would open the door for and maybe let them in.
Yep. So then it makes you question the whole who actually was the target, or was anyone a target, or was it just the house? Did things go bad? I mean, there are so many different ways you can go with this on what you could think the killer was thinking, whether, it's someone they knew, someone they didn't, whether it was a planned thing or not. I mean, there's just so many different possibilities.
Right. If you could start to solidify little pieces here and there, you can probably start leaning towards, okay, was this a break-in through the back door?
Yep.
Or was this somebody that came in through the front door that was allowed in, and then they made it seem like a break-in? I think that if there was a good profile, like you were talking about earlier, maybe that'll help lean us one way or the other.
Oh, I think the profile is going to be interesting. I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on that one.
So let's go back to, you were talking about the brick.
Yes, so it's kind of an adjacent question to everything with the brick, but I think this is an obvious question. You might be asking already, we're talking about how and when this whole strategic thing with the brick was done, if it was strategic at all, but I think the base question here is, did anyone see or hear anything?
Right.
Throwing a brick through a glass door will obviously make a fair amount of noise. There's really no hiding that. And the short and sweet answer to the question of did anyone see or hear anything is yes. People did hear something that night. And there's actually a more recent video on this case on the WMAR2 YouTube channel, which was done under their Maryland Mysteries segment. And the journalist that covers these cold cases interviewed the current detective, Tammy Burns, who's been the lead detective on this case since 2015. And in that interview, back in, I believe it was around 2018 or 2019, she explained what ear witnesses and neighbors had heard that night and said, quote, "So either it was a loud popping, a loud bang, or glass breaking. It's the description that we pick up from every neighbor. Then, after the glass breaks, a female screams. Neighbors all flip on the lights because in 1989, that's what you would do, is you would look around. You didn't jump to call 911. You do the investigation yourself," end quote. So yes, obviously many people heard that glass breaking and the scream, and some neighbors also stated that they heard dogs barking more than normal that night. But of course there were, a couple sprinkled in there that did say that they didn't hear much of anything. Regardless, there ended up being no calls made to police the night the murders took place, And I can guess that when people looked out their windows, they didn't see anything and didn't feel the need to call authorities. Now, this whole revelation goes back to my original thought on the broken slider being the way the killer got into the house. Because you have to think, we were just talking about this.
If you hear the glass,
yes,
and then the woman screams, they weren't dead, and then it was a cover-up after the fact.
Exactly. And then you have to think, too, if this person's strategically doing this, they already committed this crime, they're going to go outside of the house, break the door in. Where are they going to go? Back in the house?
Right.
This doesn't seem very probable to me.
If everybody's flipping on the lights and they're looking outside, and then they see somebody running from the scene,
yes,
then it's like, okay, bad idea.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, when you couple glass breaks, then a woman screams, not seeing anybody running away,
yep,
no calls to police, you know, it makes you think that the break-in happened, then the murders took place, the killer was probably in the house for an extended period of time, then once it had calmed down, then they made their exit.
Yes, exactly. And I will say, too, it appears as though there was one neighbor who lived, I'm pretty sure, right next door, and he had gone out with a flashlight to look around after he heard this loud bang or the glass breaking, but he didn't see anything, and he just went back inside his house for the night. So again, if the glass is coming into the house because someone's breaking it from the outside, I mean, he's probably not going to see anything. All of the damage is on the inside of the house at that point. The person's inside the house at that point. Of course, he's not going to see anything.
Right.
And, you know, it just sucked because in later years, that man felt very terrible about, you know, not calling police, not getting someone there sooner. But, you know, if you didn't see anything, you didn't see anything. I mean, he's not the police. So that's hard to, you know, put on yourself, though, as someone who is, you know, just a witness, but felt like they could help more.
Right. You're always going to feel that after the fact. But there's also that thing called the bystander effect, where it's like, okay, if I heard this, all these other people heard this. If nobody's calling the police, why do I need to call the police? Or if I don't do it and it's something really bad going on, somebody else will do it. But I'd say, I mean, even if he called the police and the police come and check the area, if they're not coming out and walking around to the back of every house, they're probably not going to find anything.
Yep.
Or maybe there's a chance that, you know, they catch the killer leaving the house later on.
Yeah.
There's a chance, but there's no guarantee that if he had called the police that anything different would have happened.
Exactly. But now let me kind of devil's advocate that a little bit too, because there are some comments online that state that there wasn't glass really like dragged through the house. So like if this person had actually done this to gain entry to the house, had thrown the brick in and then walked through the house, you would think that more glass would have been tracked through as they walked through it. But that's something that has been said isn't really what was found at the scene. So I don't really know. I feel like this one's very hard to land on. Did this person gain entry this way, or was this an afterthought? There are things that can make you think one thing and then things that can make you go the other way.
Yeah. I don't know. It's tough without being able to see like the entire scene.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously when you look at this picture from the news station that shows the broken glass on the floor, there's a ton of glass there. So you would assume that if somebody stepped on it and walked their way through, that small shards would get stuck in the bottom of their shoes and probably be tracked somewhere. But I mean, you could probably do that test 100 different times.
True.
Sometimes glass may be tracked through the house. Sometimes it may not. What if the killer jumped over the glass because he was lunging at the person that saw him?
True. Possible.
There are so many variables that you can't really account for.
Agreed.
So, I don't know. The fact that somebody heard glass break, a woman scream.
Multiple people, too. It's not even just one.
Multiple.
So.
Right. That leads you to believe that the glass broke, then either Helen or Anne or both of them
were startled by
the intruder.
Yep.
So
exactly. And you have to think too. So Detective Burns had also mentioned in that interview that it was all the houses. So on the sides, across the street, behind her house, all of these people heard these things.
Yeah.
So I would say probably at least a couple houses in either direction. So, I mean, that's a lot of people to hear that. So it seems like a very accurate description of what probably happened that night.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing we didn't touch on, do you know what time everybody heard this at?
Oh my God, you're right on track. That's exactly where I was about to go. So based on these ear witness statements, the majority of people stated that they heard the glass breaking and then the scream sometime around 11:30 p.m., which makes perfect sense within the timeline, knowing that they had left that get-together after the wake around 10:30-ish, would have taken them about 20 minutes to get home. They're likely back by, I would say, no later than 11. They're starting to get ready for bed, doing their nighttime routine. 11:30 makes sense because you would think if someone's screaming, someone's more than likely still awake
Right.
when this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, as there is in a lot of the cases we cover, especially older ones, there was a little bit of contradictory information in the beginning about some witnesses hearing the glass breaking and the scream around 2:30 in the morning. But after further investigation, 11:30 p.m. did seem like the more and the most realistic time frame and what people reported hearing the most as well.
Yeah, and I think that gentleman that lived next door that came out with the flashlight, if he had any recollection of what time he got out of bed and was looking around,
Yep.
that would be like my prime person to listen to, because he took action. He didn't just hear something, turn the lights on and look around. He got up, found a flashlight, looked around. That's like more action that may have you taking a glance at the clock to see what time it is or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that kind of came to my mind when I was researching this and just kind of thinking about it more is based on the fact that there were so many people that heard something that night, and then they were all flipping on their lights, they're all looking outside. I think it's possible that there may actually still be witnesses out there who saw more that just never said anything, whether they maybe recognize this person, maybe they're scared, whatever it was. But you have to think, like, at least for me, you hear all this racket and you're checking out your windows and then like you see nothing for like 5 minutes and then you just go to bed.
You'd be up the rest of the night.
Exactly. I would be peeking out the window over and over again. But I was also thinking, I mean, this is 2023, so I would have been calling the cops.
Get on the rocking chair with the shotgun.
Yeah, like
just stay outside the house all night.
just creeping on the neighborhood. I'll be the neighborhood watch. Thank you very much.
Right.
But the unfortunate thing about that, though, is say someone did see something and they never said anything. It goes back to what we've talked about a bajillion times already in this episode, is the fact that everyone in this neighborhood was older. So if someone saw something, we're like 30, almost 35 years now, if I can do that appropriate math, 34 years. A lot of people are probably deceased.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, I'm thinking back to, 89, though, and having a bunch of older people. You have a bunch of war veterans that are probably living in that area. These don't seem like, and I'm saying this without knowing who they are, but these don't seem like the generation of people that would be too afraid to come forward with information to say something.
Agreed. But then you have to think back to what we said before, too, whether it be, a
widow or a widower
or
whatever.
Or a child or a grandchild that might permanently live with a parent or grandparent, something like that. So there could still be younger people that might have been around, that might have noticed something, that might have heard something.
Yep.
And I'm also not saying either, because I don't know exactly who lived in what houses that heard anything. There were younger families there as well. So again, there could have been people that saw it. So.
Right. It's not like they were living in an over 65 community.
No.
It just so happened that there were older people that lived in the area.
Agreed. Yes. All right. But let's keep moving on with the investigation. So we're still talking about the scene here. I know, kind of like a couple side tangents there, but when walking through the dining area where we're thinking this person probably broke in from and into the other parts of the house, it was obvious that the women had started their nighttime routine. They were in their pajamas and, already pretty much getting ready for bed. However, it has been reported, like I just said to John a few minutes ago, that Helen had stayed up a little bit longer than Anne, and she spent time in the living room enjoying a drink and watching some TV. So Anne was in bed. They weren't up talking with each other, but Helen was in the living room by herself with like a glass of wine or something and just, having a little, they call it a nightcap before she settled down for the night.
Gotcha.
So when the family arrived on scene the next morning, and authorities too, they noticed that the lights were all still on and the television was on, and they saw the half-empty glass of wine in the living room as well. The house itself was said to not really be a mess at all, other than, obviously, the glass all over the floor, but it didn't look like anyone had rummaged through anything or attempted to take anything. So, due to the fact that nothing appeared to be missing, authorities did not think that robbery would have been the motive for this crime. However, I will bring up now this whole situation with something that was brought up by Maribeth. So when she originally posted on Web Sleuths back in 2011, she had linked to an ABC article which contained an interview with them that she was a part of. And unfortunately, that link is broken. It no longer exists. And I cannot for the life of me find the dang interview anywhere online. But within this entire thread, there are several things that are discussed that appear to have been brought up in that interview. People are constantly mentioning specific things that she's responding to, saying, yes, this happened. Yes, that happened. So it seems as though all of that was, talked about within that interview. One of these things being that something was missing, and I believe it was from Anne's possession. And it was said to be something called a scapular. Now, when I first read that, I was totally confused, had no idea what it was. even asked John, I was like, what is a scapular? And like both of us instantly went to like a shoulder bone, but that doesn't have an R in it. So we were like, all right, hold on. I did a quick Google search and a few things came up. But what I think I've landed on as being the most accurate is that it's sort of like a necklace. And I have a couple example pictures of what that might look like. So John, I'll send those to you now. Everyone listening, you know where they'll be, socials on the website. Now, according to this article that I found on simplycatholic.com, a scapular is described as being, quote, made up of narrow necklace-shaped cloth, about 24 inches in length. It normally has small blocks of engraved wool material just larger than a postage stamp at each end and is meant to slip over the head and hang equally down your back and front, end quote. And according to this same article, quote, it is as much a part of us as a wedding band, a symbol that signifies our love or commitment to another, in this case to the Blessed Mother and through her to our Lord Jesus Christ, end quote. Now, I haven't seen any recent articles from, if you will, reputable news stations that report that this item was missing, but it does appear as though it had been mentioned in that ABC interview that I just don't have access to. Regardless, it's something that might not be mentioned often today because some people theorize that this could have been something that Anne maybe left in Rudolph's coffin at the wake on the night of the 17th as like kind of a way to say goodbye to him, and that it may not have necessarily had any significance in the murder. It might not have been taken by her killer. But this was one of the things that I mentioned earlier that could kind of make you believe that if this was taken specifically from Anne in the home, could this person have known them and specifically took it for that reason?
Yeah, it's strange that they would take like a religious item.
Yeah, I thought it was a little odd.
It's not something of value.
Nope.
I mean, unless it was diamond encrusted in solid gold, but
most
it seems
likely
as
not.
Though, no, it seems as though these are like cloth items connected by a couple pieces of
other cloth, like ribbon almost.
Yeah, it's like a cross that you would wear around your neck, like a gold or a silver cross or something.
Yep.
But it's made of all cloth. Some of them have a picture of Mary on them, the Blessed Mother.
Yep. Others,
like I'm just going through a website while you were talking about it.
Yeah.
There's the scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is a brown scapular.
Yes.
Scapular of Conversion, which is a green scapular. There's a bunch of different colors. They all have different meanings. Once they've been blessed by a priest, it seems as though it's something that you should wear all the time.
Mm-hmm. That's what it seems like.
So it's almost like a piece of religious jewelry, not of value, but of like...
It's a value to you as the wearer,
right,
not as the person, to go and take
pawn
it and
or
sell
something.
it. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yep.
So I think it's kind of tough to say. I think it could go either way, but I don't think anyone really knows if it was something that was left with Rudolph or if she actually had it on her person. So again, you just really can go either way with this one, which is...
We just know it was missing from the house.
It was, yes. Other people had theorized that it could have potentially just been misplaced. Mm-hmm. Obviously in the craziness of dealing with the scene, you had Richard and his 3 children that had gotten there, when they found them. So it's just one of those things where it could have just been lost. So it's something to bring up, but I don't think we really gain too much insight into, any sort of motive or something knowing that it was taken.
Do we know what kind of scapular it was?
Not really, no.
No. I was just asking because I'm again on, what is this? CatholicCompany.com /content/ how to use the scapular.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And when you scroll down to almost the bottom of the page, there's one scapular here that says, "Behold the sign of salvation," and it looks like a Mount Carmel one. Mm-hmm. And it says, "Whoever dies wearing this scapular shall not suffer eternal fire."
Oh.
I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, I wonder then
is it
if
like
she
a protective thing?
Yeah, would she have put it in the coffin then as that, goodbye to say, right, I'm protecting you with this?
Right.
It's possible.
Or it could have been something that he wore during his life, and she wanted him to have it in death, so she put it in the coffin.
Very possible. Yep.
But I think that if that was the case, knowing that these funerals happened all this time later, you probably would have known what was in the coffin.
That's what I would think too, but who knows if people just weren't looking for that. That's also very possible.
Yeah, I suppose. That's definitely a possibility.
Now, in terms of where both Anne and Helen were found in the house, that information is just really wishy-washy. I've seen several different things reported, and I can't quite pinpoint exactly what is the most accurate. What I've landed on as what I believe to be the most accurate based on how I'm interpreting everything is that both women were found murdered in one of the back bedrooms, which I believe was Anne's bedroom, but I'm not totally 100% sure on that. But I do also want to read 2 comments for you from Maribeth that might help to clarify things a little bit on where the women were found. Quote, they were not both in their bedrooms. My mom was in the front living room. My mother was moved from the front room to her bedroom, which was the first one. My grandmother was in the second one and came out, and that is when she was killed, end quote. Then there's this comment, quote, as I understand, the TV was on and there was an unfinished glass of wine in the living room. I would believe she was not moved, but probably coerced to the bedroom. She was definitely killed in the bedroom, end quote. So to me, it makes it seem like, based on both of those comments, she was in the living room where she was enjoying her drink, and somehow, some way, whether she went back to the back bedroom if the killer had gone after Anne first where she was, or somehow this person encountered her first in the living room and then forced her into the back room. I think overall it seems as though Helen was in the living room first, but both women were found in the back of the house by the bedrooms.
Well, if you think about a ranch-style house, you know that you have like the kitchen, living room, and dining room all in the same general area.
Yeah.
And then you're probably walking down a long hallway, which has your bathroom and probably 2 or 3 bedrooms.
Yes.
So knowing that all of these ear witnesses heard the glass break, a woman scream, Helen very well could have seen this intruder making their way through the doorway and tried to run to her mother and maybe had been captured prior to making it there, thrown into the side bedroom that was right before her mother's, killed there. Then the killer may have happened upon Anne, who was wondering what was going on, opens her bedroom door, comes out of the bedroom. That killer forces her back into the bedroom and kills her there.
Yes.
But why?
Exactly. There's so many questions surrounding the why. Obviously, that's the big one, but it's like, it's just so hard to wrap your mind around.
Right. I mean, we know that Anne used to work for Exxon. Exxon's a gas company. Does she have money? I mean, she's living in not a retirement area, but she's living in a ranch-style home, a modest home. Not
they called it a middle-class
mansion.
Suburban area.
Right. So it's like, is this person coming in to rob them of,
Of
valuables? What? No. If the scapular is the only thing that seems to be missing, why would you kill these 2 women?
Exactly. It just doesn't make sense.
And I would have been on board more with the idea of the killer coming through the front door, because that could have been a more personal thing. Whereas when they're breaking in through the back glass door, making a ruckus at potentially 11:30 or 2:30 at night, depending on who's correct in their time frame.
Yep.
You're just looking to bring attention to yourself.
Yeah.
Are you in your right mind when you're doing this?
Potentially not.
And why are you killing these 2 women? What's the benefit for that person if they're not taking belongings?
Who knows?
Or any valuables.
Truly, who knows?
Right.
So regardless of exactly where Anne and Helen were located when they were found, it was reported that in terms of injuries to the women that at least caused their deaths, Helen had been beaten in the head and bludgeoned to death, and Anne had pretty much the same type of injuries and was also beaten in the head.
With what?
Unclear, but
A
we
brick?
are going to get into that in a second. No, not a brick. So it appears as though Anne had been found, I think, like right in front of one of the doors to the bedrooms. But based on comments, again, from Maribeth, it appears as though her mother, Helen, may have been attacked first, with Anne coming out of her room to see what the commotion was all about, which leads me to another comment from Maribeth that I wanted to read for you. Quote, I believe my grandmother heard my mom struggling, and that's when she got up. My mom was in the living room, not the bedroom as first thought by us, the family. She was forced back to the bedroom. My grandma was already asleep, end quote. So again, that kind of just still reiterates everything that Helen was in the living room. She was staying up, having a drink. Anne was probably just exhausted, wanted to get a night's sleep before a hard day the next day. Now,
Helen runs back towards her mother.
Yep.
Gets caught before getting there, thrown into the bedroom, killed. But what was Helen bludgeoned with? And do they believe that Anne was bludgeoned with the same thing? Because I'm thinking, older people maybe kept like a baseball bat or a billy club or something in their bedroom. That way they could protect against an intruder. Could Anne have come out with that weapon saying, hey, what's the commotion or something? I don't know. I want to know what they were bludgeoned with. It has to be a weapon of opportunity because they
might not be. It might not be. We're going to touch on it in like 2 paragraphs. So.
Well, the only reason I'm saying that it may be a weapon of opportunity.
Yeah.
Is because the brick was an item of opportunity to break through the glass window.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, tell me more.
Okay, I'm going to tell you more, but there's a couple other things before we dive into what the potential murder weapon could have been.
Okay.
So there were comments that Anne had been attempting to put her slippers on when she was attacked. So, I just feel like that's a little strange. A lot of people bring up that they think that's a little weird. That,
Did she not wear slippers in the bedroom?
Potentially, I don't know, but obviously she was asleep, so she's hearing this commotion. Maybe she didn't think it was all that serious at first. Mm-hmm. What if this was actually a person that they knew, but still broke in this way?
I mean, she was 83. Did she have hearing aids? Were they on?
Oh, that's possible too. Didn't even think of that, but
she
either
probably
way,
heard, something.
True.
Who knows how good her hearing was.
Yeah.
Started to make her way out. Didn't think it was anything serious at the point.
Throws on her slippers, trying to get out there, and then that's when she's attacked because she was found right outside the door.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the most heartbreaking things about this, though, meaning where these women were found, is that all of Helen's family, her husband and her 3 children, saw both of these women in this state.
Mm-hmm.
Helen's daughter, Maribeth, told WMAR2 News the following about what she saw that morning. Quote, I saw them. I remember seeing my mother. She was sitting in a chair up against the wall, and she had been beaten in the head. So I do recall seeing that. Very quickly, my father got us out of the house, end quote. So that's also something interesting to note, is that she was in a chair within the bedroom.
Did the killer purposely seat her in the chair prior to killing her?
Not sure.
And was she listening to their demands, hoping that they wouldn't kill her?
Possible.
Because if you kill somebody on the floor and then pick them up and prop them into the chair, it's a little strange.
I feel like I remember a comment saying that there had been, whether it be brain matter or blood or something like that on the wall behind her.
So she may have been killed in the chair.
So I believe she would have been killed in the chair, yes.
Okay.
Now, like I mentioned a little while ago, autopsies were completed for both women just a few days after they were killed, but there were no real, formal autopsy findings released publicly. The most that I was ever really able to determine based on early reporting was that both women had been beaten in the head multiple times, and their causes of death were determined to be bludgeoning. In terms of the murder weapon, which I know John is really interested to learn about, it was pretty unclear what was used in the attacks, and authorities did state that the murder weapon was not left behind at the scene. It was mentioned, though, that there were things like photos and stuff like that sent off to the FBI to try and determine at least tool marks so they could narrow down the type of weapon that could have been used. And it was determined that the FBI believed the murder weapon to be something that was likely metal, and a couple examples that were given by the current detective on the case, Detective Burns, were either a pipe or a crowbar type weapon.
Okay, so we're talking something that's probably long, cylindrical, obviously, like you said, made of metal, but not a hammer, not like a spike type weapon. So...
Yeah, so it would be more of not like a sharp end to it, but like a blunt side of an object.
Okay.
Now, within the first several months after the 2 were killed, authorities pretty much had no clue what the motive was for this crime, had no leads left to work, and were essentially at a standstill in their investigation. They also had no people of interest or suspects, but I will say, just in case it's a question in your mind, authorities did clear the family pretty much right from the start. Now, I don't know exactly what family members they meant, other than the ones who found the 2 women deceased in the house the morning of the funeral. But there was one person that came in clutch on web sleuths, and I love when people do this. I feel like I go back to when we were talking about cases in Ohio, and there was that guy that had done all the microfilm and translated it into, digitization on web sleuths. This was yet another ABC article that doesn't exist anymore, but this person took a quote from it regarding the situation with the family. And that piece stated, quote, "They quickly ruled out Helen's husband and children. After more investigation, the rest of the family was cleared as well," end quote. So I have to think that they likely interviewed multiple family members, confirmed alibis to see if anyone was in the area, things like that, so that they could rule them out. So I would assume that most immediate and probably slightly more removed family was probably cleared.
And once at least you and I feel, I don't want to speak for you, but believe that this intruder came through the door and then killed them.
Yeah.
I kind of ruled out anybody that would know them on a personal basis.
I agree, yeah.
Or at least that would be friendly enough to let them through the front door at that time of night.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. Could have been someone they knew in passing, could have been someone, that was just an acquaintance, but not
Right.
someone that they would be like, yeah, sure, come in my house at 11 p.m. the day before my husband and or father's funeral.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I think we can rule out the fact that it's not like a cover-up. Not somebody that came in through the front door, killed them, then broke the back door.
Yeah, I agree. So at this point, 2 months in, authorities were no better off than they had been in the early days of their investigation, and due to their lack of suspects and again, lack of a motive, authorities with the Harford County Sheriff's Department decided to get in touch with the Baltimore County PD, as there was an officer there that had expertise in putting together profiles. So by this time, the profile was put out to the public, and it was around December of '89 when this was released.
I gotta say, this is interesting. This is the first profile that we're not getting from the FBI.
Yeah, I was very intrigued by that too. I was like, oh, Baltimore County, okay, cool.
Well, Baltimore.
Yeah,
We could say a lot about Baltimore.
this is true.
Side note, anybody that likes true crime shows, cop shows, Baltimore, gotta watch The Wire if they haven't.
Yes, I still
Like
need
you.
to watch that. Yeah, I'm on that list. I'm on a Succession kick right now, though, so we'll keep going with that. But details of the profile were released in the Baltimore Sun, and the first article I read about the profile started out pretty wild, especially considering the headline, which was, quote, "Police say profile of killer points to victim's neighbor."
The guy with the flashlight?
No, no.
Oh, jeez.
But I was like, what? I was so confused. Like,
Why,
what a
because he fit
bizarre
the profile?
headline. No, it had nothing to do with that guy. Just once you hear the profile, you'll be like, okay. So this Baltimore Sun piece begins with, quote, "The person who killed Ann K. Furst and her daughter Helen S. Larkin in Aberdeen last October probably isn't sorry for what he did, and may, in fact, be reading this article," police investigators said last week. The killer is probably a young white male, 17 to 25 years old, who has never been married and who, at the time of the crime, lived within walking distance of the house at 818 Maxa Road where the two women were bludgeoned to death, end quote. The article continues with more details from the profile. Quote, "If the killer does indeed match the description in the profile, he is a cold-blooded, remorseless person," police said. It would appear, based on the actions of the offender of the night of October 17th and morning of October 18th, that he came to the Maxa Road residence specifically to kill, the profile says. He will express little guilt or remorse over what he has done, and his main concern will be in avoiding detection. However, he is probably not a neighborhood troublemaker, the profile says, though he is most likely a nocturnal person who has been seen walking the community at night. The profile says the killer is, at most, a high school graduate with a sporadic work history who is expected to be living with his parents or an elderly female resident. On the night or day before the murders, the profile says, the killer was probably involved in a stressful event involving a family problem. Those closest to him would have noticed changes in his behavior immediately following the crime, as well as changes that have since then, the profile says. Police believe the killer will follow the investigation through the media. The publicity will affect his behavior and actions noticeably, and those around him will notice his preoccupation with the investigation, the profile says, end quote. So there's a lot to dissect there.
That was a long quote.
Yes. So, John, what are your thoughts on the details of the profile?
So when you started the quote, I was like, wow, that's very generic.
Yeah.
But then as they started to narrow it down, they're like, okay, 17 to 25-year-old, young white male, probably lives with an elderly female resident or parents. Another thing that seems to be on every profile is sporadic work history, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, if this is a young male that is cold-blooded and remorseless, and they went there specifically to kill, maybe they depend on the person that they live with because they have that sporadic work history. And they couldn't take out their anger on that person because they depend on them.
Yeah.
So then they were out fuming, whatever, and maybe they looked through the window and they saw Helen drinking a glass of wine or something, and then they were like, oh, I'm going to go after them.
I mean, yeah, it's perfectly possible, but I think the thing that really stood out to me had to do with the fact that they called him a nocturnal type person, and that he would be seen walking the neighborhood at night. What brings you to that conclusion, you know?
I don't know. I don't know why they would say that they're nocturnal and usually walk through the streets or whatever.
Yeah, and I just feel like some of it almost contradicts itself, like saying, oh, he's not a neighborhood troublemaker, but he's also remorseless and he has little guilt and he was just a cold-blooded killer.
Yeah.
Like, how do those two things
It
coincide?
doesn't seem like an FBI profile. I'm not saying that this person from Baltimore didn't know what they were doing, but
Yeah.
it seems like the profiles that we've talked about where they've come from the FBI, they seem a lot more cohesive and they seem to like nail a certain type of person.
Yeah.
But with this one, I wouldn't necessarily say it totally contradicts itself with like the different types of characteristics that are laid out throughout the profile, but it's not as seamless. Like you can't look at this and just like point towards a certain type of person.
It's not like the profile for Rosie Gordon.
Right.
Like where we were looking at Randall Breer. Sure, it seems as though he's not the person that killed her, but I feel like the profile did a good job of pointing at the person responsible for the sexual assaults.
Right. I mean, there are contradictions or there are things that you may think won't coincide. Like if they have a sporadic work history, but they're not a troublemaker, it's like, okay, well, if somebody has sporadic work history, there's some type of problematic thing going on with them.
Yeah.
To either get them fired from work or want to leave work or whatever. So
Yep.
I'll go back on what I said. It does kind of contradict itself a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I don't think that the profile really helps that much. I mean, maybe if they canvassed the area and somebody would have matched this, okay, let's look into it a little bit more. But I don't know. I wouldn't say that, if they found somebody that matched this profile, it's probably that person. I'd say that you can probably find people that display characteristics that go one way and meet it and that go a totally other way and meet it. It's too vague, I think.
I don't even necessarily think it's vague. I just think there are things that it's like, how can you pinpoint this person when they could have like so many different personality traits that just don't seem like they would be within one person unless like this is a multiple personality disorder situation,
Yeah.
Like I think there are really interesting points in here, and I think it does kind of help me believe that it's possible that this was someone in the area that didn't necessarily say, I'm going to rob this house because I know they're going to be gone at the wake. Like, why wouldn't you strike then at 7:30 when they're going to be at the wake? Why are you showing up once the women are already home? So that's something that kind of helped me to come to a better conclusion, I guess, to say, I think it is possible that this person could have been just from around the area. And I think also what you said about there potentially being this, they said in the profile, this stressful event or something that happened, but it's with this person that they depend on.
Right.
So they can't get rid of that person because they need them to survive, but they're going to take out their anger on somebody else.
Right. They hold a lot of contempt for the person that they live with, but they don't want to attack that person. And their contempt for that person is just boiled over and they're looking for an outlet to relieve some of that frustration. And they ended up going and attacking and killing Helen and Anne as opposed to the person that they live with and maybe depend on.
Yes. And I think, everybody knows how much I can't stand all the serial killer talk, but of course there are serial killers who do commit these crimes, and we've talked about cases that ended up being solved before, and it was a serial killer who committed them. And I just think back to like Ed Kemper.
Yep.
He has this resentment towards his mother.
And he's going after
these co-eds as, an in place of his mother type situation so that he can get his anger out, even though his real anger is stemming from his hatred for his mother.
Yeah.
So I think that does make sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that this person is a serial killer, but they could have that same kind of situation going on in their head to say, I'm very angry at my mother, but I can't do anything about it because I need her. Let me go after this person instead.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, it kind of popped into my head too. Another slight contradiction is that this profile says that they are cold-blooded and remorseless.
Yeah.
Yet they should be displaying, post-offense characteristics. It's like, well, if they're cold-blooded and remorseless, they'd act the same exact way tomorrow that they did the day before they killed this person.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about that.
So I don't know. I don't put a whole lot of weight in this. I think that there could be probably valuable information in this profile that would pertain to the killer.
Yeah.
But I can't look at this and be like, okay, I think I can narrow down who this is.
I totally agree. So outside of the profile, that is really most of what's been released in regards to this case until that WMAR2 interview that happened a few years ago. There really wasn't too much new information I was able to get from that interview either, but some questions I had about contradictory information were answered based on that segment, and that's, the details I've given to you. But I will say, one of the biggest things that was brought to light in that interview was that there was apparently no DNA left behind by this killer. And the way they described it was not even a drop of DNA, which is pretty wild to think, considering this was 1989. I doubt people are out there like thinking, oh, can't leave my DNA at a crime scene. You know, people were dropping cigarette butts and all these things that get them nailed years later.
Right.
So like, was this person cognitively thinking about that? I don't think so. But who knows? It's possible.
I mean, it's October in Maryland.
Yeah.
I don't think it's cold enough to be walking around wearing gloves.
No.
But you would assume that they're probably wearing gloves.
If nothing was left on anything, right?
And then, were they bald? Did they have a shaved head? Like, there's no hair anywhere?
Yep.
I don't know. But also, we're talking 1989 when it's not commonplace to bring in, like, CSI and go through the place for little strands of hair.
Yes, agreed.
So.
But I will say, I'm wondering if you have this question, like, in the back of your mind and you just haven't asked it yet, but this was something that a lot of people on forums that were talking back and forth with Maribeth were asking. And that has to do with the brick. You have to grab that and throw that through the door. So, did you get prints on that? I don't know if you can transfer prints to a brick. I'm not sure about like the type of material.
Well, it is porous.
Yeah. So, oils from your fingers. I don't know.
But again, the times. 1989.
Yes. So, but you're thinking, would there have been anything on that? Even if this person just touched it and there weren't fingerprints, there's got to be DNA. Right? So people were asking, oh, where's the brick? Where's the brick? And it's very, very, very possible that the brick is just MIA.
Really?
Yeah.
It was never collected, or was collected and lost over time, or...
Unsure.
Was never there to begin with.
Very, very unsure.
Because then how can you say it was broken by a brick?
Yeah, I'm not sure, because you can't even see the brick in the photo that I have here. So, I mean, I think based on what I know, I'm pretty sure it was there. I'm pretty sure they took it, and I have to guess that it was lost.
So police gathered it.
Yeah.
And then it was lost over the years.
That's what it seems like. Again, this was just a comment from Maribeth on a forum. This wasn't anything that was reported, you know, by police themselves, put out to the public or anything like that.
Right, but if everybody was saying that a brick was thrown through the door, there had to be a brick at some point, and in order for them to say that a brick was thrown through the door, they had to have collected it on scene as evidence.
Exactly, and I feel like that could be like the thing that
right,
gets
if they had it
this
nowadays,
person.
they could.
Yeah. Unless this person pre-planned this and wore gloves specifically. But again, like, it's just not jiving with me for this to have been this super well thought out thing.
Right. And it's also like the local police department knew that they were not capable of handling this double murder, contacted this other agency, which had more resources available. So, I mean, you can't say that it was, this small agency bumbled the whole investigation when you know that another agency with all those resources came in and did it.
Yes.
So, I don't know. That's strange that it's lost. I was thinking about, could they pull something from the brick? But I don't know. If this wasn't somebody that was just walking through the streets on an October night and ended up seeing Helen through a window or whatever and decided to attack her, and was planning to go to this house and planning to kill them, I could see them wearing gloves.
Agreed.
Whereas if it's just this nocturnal person walking through the streets, like, are they going to wear gloves?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a coin toss.
It seems like it's possible that it was a crime of opportunity because people had also mentioned, too, about the big window that was in the living room. You could see that in the Zillow listing. It was like a big picture window.
Right.
So if the lights are on, the TV's on, it's dark out, did this person see her in there and just say, I'm going to take this opportunity. Yeah. But then where did they get this metal potential pipe or crowbar from?
Right.
You know, were they just walking around like, you know, hanging onto a lead pipe? Like, that's bizarre.
Unless they found it in the house or outside the house and they used it and took it with them.
Possible. I was also thinking back to what you said about the slider before. You don't necessarily have to use a broomstick or something. You could use a metal pipe to stick in the door there. So again, maybe this was all just opportunity. This person grabbed whatever they could find in this house.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. You also want to remember back, too, to the beginning of the episode, we were talking about how Anne was, you know, this magnificent gardener. Could it have been some type of garden tool? Could it have been a handle of something? Like, it could have been something that was grabbed outside, brought in. You know, they saw the brick, they threw the brick, and they brought this weapon in because they had gathered it from outside. They could have went to a shed. I'm sure Rudolph had some type of, you know, home tool collection that could have been in a shed. Who knows?
Very interesting, yeah. Well, there's a little bit more that I found, too, on, like, the potential for DNA and stuff like that Maribeth had, again, posted. This was on the Find a Death forum. She stated, quote, "The Harford County Sheriff Department did send some evidence in for further DNA testing. We followed up as they said we should know something in June, nothing yet to date. This has been the frustration with this case. My case is not a priority and never will be." end quote. So she definitely voiced her frustrations. That comment was from 2019. She has mentioned that she feels like she is kind of alone in trying to track down her mother and grandmother's killer or killers. And she's kind of been struggling to get attention on the case. And I don't know if this was before or after the interview with WMAR2 News. So it's possible, that she was able to finally get someone local to take a look at the case, to talk about the case, to keep it out there. But she has also mentioned that she's like one of the only people in her family that really talks about it, that's pushing for answers, which again, like goes back to her comment of her kind of feeling alone, trying to find out what happened to her mom and grandma.
Well, you got to think she was older than her siblings. Yeah. That probably stuck with her much more than her younger siblings.
Yeah, she was
if
19.
You think about it. So
like that's such a formative age for, first of all, that to happen, but to also see that.
Right. It's not like you're 4 or 5 years old where there's a good chance you might forget it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, without this case being with a specialized agency or a private detective, I understand why she's saying that she feels alone and that she feels like she's not a priority, because if this is just with a standard department and it's not a specialized unit, you have a standard department that's going through and dealing with all the crimes that are happening since then.
Yeah.
And they're just stuck with the backlog. So it's not a great place for her to be, unfortunately.
No, definitely not. And as of today, police have said that they have no suspects and pretty much no motive. And Detective Burns had told WMAR2 News, quote, "So the person coming, did they come to kill Anne and then unluckily Helen was there? Possibly. There's literally no answer on why it happened. There's no suspects we have in mind currently," end quote.
Which is crazy, because if this profile says that it's a neighbor within walking distance, you would assume that they would have brought in a couple people that matched at least some of the characteristics laid out in that profile and talked to them.
Yeah.
But no names ever came forward. Nobody was ever charged. It doesn't seem like anybody was named as a person of interest.
Nope.
It's unfortunate. And when you go that long, 89 to now, where no suspects have been named, unless you find something like the brick and you can find DNA on it, and that DNA matches something through 23andMe or somebody that's been in the system or whatever.
Yeah.
Outside of like a long shot like that, I don't know what you can hope for.
I know, and that's what's tough.
Or what you can do to work towards finding out who did this.
Exactly.
Like from her perspective.
Of course, yeah. And then she's probably thinking too, like, how many people are even still alive?
Yeah.
How many people are even still in the area? How am I going to track them all down? I mean, there's so much to it. And for her to feel so alone in this, and, it seemed as though once Detective Burns took over, it seemed like things started to kind of go a little bit more in the right direction. But who knows where it stands now? Like, she could still be feeling just as frustrated 4 or 5 years later. So at this point, we can kind of move on to theories, which there really aren't many, but there is something that I had to pretty much completely and totally piece together based on multiple people's comments on Web Sleuths. Again, it was something that appeared to come from that ABC segment, so I don't know exactly how accurate this is, but I kept seeing people talk about these 2 brothers. Who are these brothers? And I was like, what is going on here? And I think what I've kind of deduced it down to is that there were 2 brothers who may or may not have lived somewhere in the general vicinity that had issues with drugs and drug addiction. And I guess that kind of aligns with a theory that someone did actually come into this house to try and take something, like a robbery, even though it didn't seem as though that's really what had happened. But people were questioning, could this have been something for medication, for painkillers, for things like that?
I mean, if Rudolph was a cancer patient, more than likely he had some type of pain meds in there.
Here's the thing. It's possible that he was in hospice or he was in the hospital.
So none of that stuff would have been in the house anyway.
Exactly. So people had been asking Maribeth, like, oh, what kind of medications could they have had in the house? Things like that. And she didn't really think that there would have been much of anything. I guess her mom had suffered from some like circulation issue where like her extremities would get cold, but she's like, those meds would only be good for circulation. So
I mean, in my opinion, this theory is just off the mark. Yeah. Because if you have 1 or 2 drug addicted persons that are willing to break into the house and murder 2 older women, yet there's no valuables clearly missing, no, it doesn't fit. Because if they're druggies and they're looking to break in and find stuff to pawn or to sell,
to have more
to
money
get
to
drugs,
buy more drugs, exactly.
The jewelry would have been ransacked. They would have taken whatever they could in order to sell and pawn and get their fix.
Yep.
So
agreed.
To me, I don't think so.
Okay, so let me ask you this question about the only other theory that I've seen really posed online by people who have talked about this case. And it could hold weight, it couldn't hold weight. I don't really know the answer to this because I personally have not been to many wakes or funerals. And I feel as though you have been to more. You might know more.
I have
of
been
this.
to quite a few.
Yeah. So is it in any way, shape, or form commonplace to give gifts to the family that have lost a loved one, whether that be an envelope of some cash or a card or something like that, where there may have been some money given to Anne? Is
It's a
that something
possibility.
that could have happened? Okay.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Usually there's, at least at several of the wakes that I've been to, there's usually some type of, wooden pedestal up near the service area where you usually go and, you say your last words to the person in the casket.
Yep.
There is a place where you can leave envelopes and cards and stuff like that. So it could be, and I bet it was more commonplace back in 89.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. Yep.
Because, wakes and funerals and all these services are expensive. So, the community would usually, and family members would usually come forward to help with those costs and expenses.
Yeah.
So there is that possibility where, if she had collected those cards and brought them home with her, hey.
So is that the motive then? Is this motivated by money? Was this someone who did actually attend the wake that, could have just been an acquaintance, but just stopped by to pay their respects and maybe was having a rough time and saw all that money and decided to take that opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to steal this, and maybe things just went wrong.
It could be, but there would have to be more people in the know throughout the family that would say, oh yeah, all of these people left cards here and Anne took them home with her.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Yeah.
And I would hope. I mean, you can't really say, oh, this is something that detectives would have totally missed.
Yeah, that would just be complete and total negligence.
Right.
On a whole new level.
So if we were looking at, a fictional crime, a hunt-a-killer box.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you were like, okay, this is what we have. Could this have happened? Yes, but knowing that there was an actual investigation that took place, and you have, Detective Burns currently that's working the investigation, she can go back and talk to these other relatives that were probably at the wake, and they would even still know this.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
So it has to be something that investigators would have asked and known.
Yeah.
If not, shame on me for putting faith in them.
It could be something they're keeping very, very close because...
But didn't they come forward and say that robbery was not a motive?
They haven't said that like flat out recently. They say, you have all these detectives
well, you would have
99.9% sure that this didn't happen, but...
Right, but you would have Maribeth coming forward and saying, well, she wasn't at the wake, though.
Yeah, no, she was going to the funeral the next day.
She was going to the funeral the next
day,
so she didn't have firsthand knowledge of it.
So who knows what people went to
I don't
that
know.
as well. I mean, and she was like constantly like telling people online, like, I'm open to anything. Give me your theories. I want to know what you think. What's possible?
Yeah.
Because she's just fighting so hard for answers.
Okay, I can't rule that out then.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's really possible, but I wasn't sure, and I knew you would know if, that was something that was more commonplace to give gifts like that. And I think you're right, helping family with a cost because funerals are expensive. So
right. And I mean, you don't even have to look at it as a gift. It's like a sympathy card with, funds to help for the arrangements.
Exactly.
So,
yeah,
it's definitely a possibility. I'd be interested to know who else was at the wake because obviously when you have a wake, people come in, they form their line, they say their last respects to the person, and then they usually go through the line of the family members, giving their condolences. Who was in the line with Anne? Were there any other brothers, sisters? I mean, she was 83, Rudolph was in his 80s, so I doubt his parents or her parents were still alive.
Nope, definitely Helen. And then she had another sister who had lived in Churchville. That's whose house they went to after the wake.
Yep.
So I don't know how many other siblings she may have had. But.
Well, those would be the people that you have to key in on, the ones that were at the wake that would know some of that information.
Absolutely.
Because if any of you have ever been part of a wake before, you have that core line of people, the next of kin and family members, close family members and stuff. You are your own group, essentially. So you're there before everybody arrives for the wake. You pretty much stay there after everybody leaves from the wake. You would know if Anne collected these cards, put them in her purse, and left with them.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's something that really, if it hadn't been, needs to be asked and looked into.
Anyone that was in the line with Anne.
Right, because if you can add robbery as the motive, because all of this stuff was taken, then I'd be like, okay, these two brothers that may have drug addictions, well, maybe they're good for it.
Yeah.
But if you had all these people coming forward and talking about these brothers, you would assume, again, that investigators had looked into them, talked to them, looked for an alibi, blah, blah, blah.
Based on comments from Maribeth, again, it seemed like they were looked into, but she didn't know how deeply. So.
Sure. Okay.
Do you have any other theories? Because that's all I got.
No, I mean, we kind of touched on a couple theories before. Okay, was this somebody that just broke in through the back door and attacked them? Or was this somebody that knew them well enough to be let into the house at 11:30 at night?
Yep.
And then they were trying to cover their tracks after the fact. I think it's clear that whoever did this came in through the back door, unsuspecting to Anne and Helen.
Agreed.
And attacked them from there. The motive is still unclear. If you look at just the profile, it may be because the killer had grievances with other individuals that they couldn't take out their frustrations on, so they ended up attacking Helen and Anne and killing them. That's a possibility. And then you have these other two brothers. Was it really a robbery? And we just don't know because this little piece of information kind of fell through the cracks.
Yeah.
I don't really have a lot of other thoughts outside of what's been covered.
Yeah, I agree. It's a tough one. It really is. And it's just so unfortunate that it's been so long and it feels like it should be a solvable case. But
yeah, I wonder if that brick would ever be found
Yeah.
and say it was picked up by investigators, perfectly stored and never touched by any hands that weren't gloved. And the only DNA that will be on there would be the person who laid the brick maybe and the person who picked the brick up and threw it through the door. If they could ever find that and test that and found something on there, I mean, that would be huge. The fact that that seems to be MIA at the time, that's like your one go-to thing because if the murder weapon wasn't left at the scene, but the brick was, and this person picked up the brick ungloved, threw it through the window, who knows? That could be the one thing that really fingers the killer and can help bring at least Maribeth some closure and some justice.
I think it's that, or it's really someone coming forward, because something else to think about would be how absolutely violent their murders were. This person would have blood on them. There's no way that they would have beaten these women to death like this and not left that home without blood on their body, on their clothes, anywhere.
Were there any bodies of water near the house where the killer could have, like, you know, washed themselves off?
And thrown the murder weapon?
Oh, maybe.
I mean, it's somewhat close to the Susquehanna River, but you have to travel like all the way up.
Susquehanna River. We've talked about that guy before.
Yes, we have. It goes through multiple states. So, I mean, sure, but that's not very close.
Yeah. Well, the killer or killers also could have gone home and showered. I mean, if they have elderly parents or an elderly person that they're living with, they may have been asleep and they just kind of went right in and they were like, what are you doing coming home so late? And they were like, go back to bed. I got to shower.
Yeah.
You know, and they could
like
have been
pulling
totally
a Caleb
oblivious.
Hughes, throwing the
Yeah,
stuff
throw
in the
all
wash
the stuff in the wash and the dryer and everything. Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, again, witness statements could be a big deal in this case as well. People coming forward with what they know could be the smallest thing that you think is insignificant that could break the case wide open.
Yep, I totally agree.
Maribeth shouldn't be alone in her fight to find answers to who killed her mother and grandmother. There have to be people out there that know more, and it's very possible the killer or killers could still be alive, and they should have to face prosecution for what they did all those years ago. So please, if you know who killed Anne Furst and Helen Larkin, or have any information that may help in this case, regardless of how small, please contact the Harford County Sheriff's Office at 410-838-6600. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at Wicked Deeds Pod and on Twitter at Wicked Deeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.